Well, hello everybody, and I hope you are enjoying our conference so far. I was in a great session this morning hearing about some case studies of some young gifted people. It's really good to get together, even although it's online, and I hope you're enjoying things. Thank you for tuning in to this keynote panel. It's discussing, I think, a very, very topical issue. The terms neurodiversity, neurodivergent, and neurodiverse are certainly entering the lexicon here in the United Kingdom. I was involved in a Wellcome Trust project last year, exploring what it means to be and to support staff and students who are neurodiverse in my university. So this isn't just about schools, it's about education generally, and indeed I would say our society as well needs to hear about this. So normally keynotes have one expert talking, but why have one when we can have four this morning? If you want to know more details about each of our experts, then you can read about those underneath the information about this session. Please go and see that fascinating work that each of them is involved in. But suffice to say, I think this is going to be a really interesting and topical panel. Please get your questions ready. I can see greetings coming in from all over the world, Tokyo, Australia, England, India. It's amazing to see how many people are tuning in for this session. So thank you. Also, get your questions ready for the panel too. And welcome to our four panel members. And without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Michelle, Matthew, Christian, and Wendy. And Wendy, as our expert chair, the floor is yours.
Thank you so very much, Margaret. Hello, I'm Wendy Behrens, and I'm speaking to you from Red Wing, Minnesota in the United States, where I am the Gifted and Talented Education Specialist for the Minnesota Department of Education, and I'm a consultant. Before we begin today, I'd like to thank all of you for joining us, no matter what time of day it is around the world. And on behalf of this panel, let me say we do appreciate all of your work on behalf of gifted and talented learners. And also, excuse me, a thank you to the World Council for Gifted and Talented Children. Today's presentation is on thinking of choice exceptionality, preparing a school infrastructure to support students who are neurodiverse. Nearly every general education classroom includes students with exceptionalities. When student exceptionalities are identified, educators have the opportunity and the professional obligation to address those needs, creating a school infrastructure that supports twice exceptional learners takes planning, resources, and teacher training. In this session, a panel of international experts will discuss evidence-based and promising practices to address neurodiversity within the context of a school setting. During our session, we will explore three major themes. What is neurodiversity and how does gifted fit into the concept? What does the shift from the concept of disability to neurodiversity, neurotypical, and neurotypical entail? Is this actually a paradigm shift, or are we using new words to describe the same phenomena? And finally, how can we prepare an infrastructure that is supportive of neurodiverse students? We're going to begin our panel discussion today by allowing each of our presenters to introduce themselves. We'll start with Matt Fugate. And Matt, if you would tell us where you're from and what your role is.
Thank you so much, and good day to everyone. My name is Matt Fugate. I am provost of Bridges Graduate School of Cognitive Diversity and Education. I am based in Houston, Texas, and really excited to be here with you all this morning. Thank you.
Thank you. And Michelle.
Hi everyone, my name is Michelle Ronksley-Pavia. I'm a lecturer in inclusive education at Griffith University here in Queensland, Australia. I work in the field of gifted education and twice exceptionality and have a passion for understanding the complexities of gifted individuals who also face learning challenges. My research focuses on the lived experience of giftedness and twice exceptionality and how educators can support these learners to develop their talents. And it's my great pleasure to be with you all here tonight, which it is here on the East Coast of Australia, and to be part of this esteemed keynote panel with Wendy, Matt, and Christian. Thanks, Wendy.
Thank you, Michelle. And Christian, if you'll introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name is Christian Fischer, and I'm full professor of education with a special focus on school pedagogy, gifted research and individual support at the University of Münster in Germany. And in my research, I have a special focus on multiple exceptional children, addressing diversity, self-regulated learning, and adaptive teacher education. And I'm very happy to be part of this panel, and hopefully we have a good discussion.
Well, Christian, I am certain we're going to have a wonderful discussion. And by the way, I'd like to mention to you all that following our questions that I've prepared, we will have time for questions. So as we've heard from Margaret, please feel free to use the question and answer portion of your screen. So let's get started. And I think we're going to start today with Christian. And Christian, as I mentioned earlier, we've seen a shift in our field from speaking about gifted learners to the term neurodiverse. What are your thoughts on the concept of neurodiversity and how gifted learners fit into that concept? And by the way, are those terms interchangeable?
Well, thanks a lot for this question. First of all, I want to welcome the concept of neurodiversity, especially in the concept of multiple exceptional learners. This implies to the concept of diversity, which is seen as a resource for individual and reciprocal learning and development, and it's closely related to the concept of inclusive education in Germany. In this context, the concept of neurodiversity is also fitting extension when, for example, autism, ADHD, dyscalculia, dyslexia are seen as natural forms of human diversity, thus opposing a pathological connotation. Whether the concept of giftedness also fit into this depends on the respective understanding of this term. In the case of a traditional understanding of giftedness with a focus on IQ-related abilities, this might fit better than in the case of a broader understanding of giftedness, as pursued in a research association in Germany, where we work together with 300 schools and researchers from 17 universities. This research association generally describes giftedness as a person performance-related development potential, and the performance potential results from an individual constellation of ability, potential, and personality potential. This is linked to a dynamic concept of giftedness. So giftedness can be developed and changed through encouragement and support. In this understanding, giftedness is also seen more than a just neurological differences that arises as the result of normal genetic variation. Therefore, I would have to be examined whether the perspective then possibly goes beyond the traditional understanding of neurodiversity, where the present experts can still give important hints.
Thank you very much. And let's move to Michelle.
Thanks, Wendy. Internationally, the term neurodiversity is widely used to acknowledge the diversity of brain functioning, as Christian's just touched on. Interestingly, in Australia, the conception of neurodiversity is often connected to neurodivergent conditions like ADHD and autism. Here, there hasn't really been a shift from using the term giftedness to using neurodiversity instead, at least not as yet. A recent Australian government report defined neurodiversity as an umbrella term that refers to the diversity in the way people's brains work. The report suggested that neurodiversity is associated with a range of what they called developmental conditions and experiences. Here in Australia, that still tends to be in terms of developmental conditions and experiences such as autism, ADHD, and traumatic early life events and experiences. This government report had more of a narrow deficit kind of definition and understanding of neurodiversity, which I guess is more typically how it is currently understood and being used over here. The report suggests that neurodiverse individuals, and I quote, may need additional support to learn, which I think in essence could be suggestive of gifted children as well. The report also advocated for psychological assessments to confirm a child's neurocognitive status, tools we've been using in gifted education for decades. So at this stage, at least in the Australian context, I don't believe that the term giftedness and neurodiversity are being used interchangeably as yet. Many people still retain myths and stereotypes and misunderstanding about both terms, which isn't helpful in gaining accommodations and adjustments and supports in schools.
Thank you, Michelle. And now our colleague from the US.
Gifted learners in the context of neurodiversity in the United States, you tend to see that conversation more when you're talking specifically about twice exceptional learners, those learners who are gifted. And so that again touches on what Michelle and Christian have already alluded to. There tends to be more of a focus on, I think still the leading edge tends to be on the challenges that the child faces, the ADHD related to ADHD, to autism, to dyslexia, et cetera. Where I agree that giftedness, though, because it does require, as Michelle touched on, same in the United States, because giftedness does require those special services, that identification, then I think there's a lot of overlap that you see. And so it's starting to become more commonplace in the United States to think about neurodiversity and the inclusion of giftedness almost to the exclusion of the use of the word gifted, and making it a much more broad term and more all-encompassing.
Thank you. And now for our second question, we'll begin with Michelle. What does the shift from the concept of disability to neurodiversity and neurotypical mean? Is this actually a paradigm shift, or are we using new words to describe the same phenomena?
Thanks, Wendy. And a really great question, I think. Any shift in terminology from disability to neurodiversity needs to consider the many aspects and purposes of both terms. So in essence, what does disability and neurodiversity mean? Do we as yet have a shared understanding of either or both of these terms? All such questions that the panel is considering during this keynote. Neurodiversity grew out of a move to distinguish between the medicalisation and pathologizing of disability, which still dominates disability support and accommodations or adjustments in education settings. The medical model of disability rests on a rather limited perception of the so-called normality of human development, whereas neurodiversity aims to move away from that pathologizing of neurological, cognitive, and developmental normality. The emerging neurodiversity paradigm shifts understanding to acknowledge and recognize that neurodiversity is normal and natural, and that, of course, no two brains are alike. It's a move aimed at being more accepting and inclusive. Of course, an individual person's understanding and the prevailing societal understandings of each term are really important. Does a person prefer to use the term disability or neurodiversity or giftedness when referring to themselves? It's always good to ask someone what they prefer. One of the biggest concerns that I have, which I know is shared by colleagues here in Australia, is that any shift in terminology from disability to neurodiversity could potentially mean that protection afforded by disability discrimination legislation no longer applies. This potentially has huge implications, as definitions of disability in legislation might not stretch to include neurodiversity. There could be problems with trying to get accommodations and adjustments for students who have solely been identified in specialist reports as being neurodiverse, without specifying a disability such as Matt was talking about, dyslexia, autism, ADHD, and so forth. And it might mean that they don't come under the protection of disability discrimination definitions. So on the other hand, if a professional's report were to call a child neurodiverse and then go on to specify which legislatively protected disability they've been formally diagnosed with and provide some credible evidence of that, it becomes a matter of evidence law rather than disability law. So it could be a problem over here, and I expect in other parts of the world as well. It needs some serious considerations in any shifts in terminology. What are your thoughts, Matt?
I totally agree. The idea that right now in the United States, the way our laws are written for services, it does follow a medical model. Neurodiversity is growing out of the social model of and coming from within the community of learners and adults themselves. So this is arising in the United States as this is how we as a community want and need to be seen. And so right now you've got a little bit of push back and forth between how the law sees neurodiverse individuals and how the community of neurodiverse individuals see themselves. And so right now we're kind of straddling two worlds where we have to live within our school systems within these laws of a medical model of disability. But societally, we're moving towards a more strength-based perspective of neurodiversity. And that is coming from the community itself. And so I think it's going to take a little bit of time for the two systems, the education system and society, to come together to merge into one definition. And that's going to take a lot of advocacy and a lot of work from professionals in our field, researchers and educators, to get that message to the political bodies that are creating the laws and regulations in how we identify and serve students within our schools.
Thank you, Matt. And of course, adding to that is the complexity of the lack of the federal mandate in the United States and local control. So every state in the United States has a different way of thinking about gifted education. So I feel like we're beginning to peel back the layers of the onion here. Christian, tell us a little bit about your thoughts as well, and about Germany in terms of the approach to neurodiversity and gifted education.
Yes. Especially in Germany, the concept of neurodiversity explicitly addresses multiple exceptional students. And for this target group, it seems to be extremely helpful. But what we often can observe in Germany, a strong focus on deficits. So the idea of neurodiversity can help to overcome the often one-sided focus on deficits and a stronger focus on the potentials of individuals can be given a greater intention. That is, in my opinion, extremely important. And the approach facilitates a potential-oriented approach to diversity, so that the use of the strengths to overcome difficulties appear natural, and that are important experiences, especially in our school system.
Thank you. Well, let's continue our conversation about labeling. And our next question begins with Matt. Giftedness as a social construct is frequently described as an uncomfortable label by many. Many avoid the term as they think it implies an inequitable distribution of intelligence. As the term neurodiversity grows in use, is it easier to talk about the needs of gifted learners in your country? And is one term preferred by another? And where does talent development fit into the picture?
Yeah, this is a great question, and one that is sparking a lot of conversation in the United States right now. Giftedness, we have a complicated history. And so the negative connotations have come from within our field as through the historical development of giftedness and how we look at it, and that is ever evolving. I love that we are moving towards this work, the work of neurodiversity, because I think it is a much more inclusive term that we can start to think about and acknowledge, as Michelle touched on earlier, that we're all of our brains are wired slightly differently. There are no two ways that people think and learn that are alike. And so I think it's much more encompassing. Now, I know it within the context of the United States, there's been a lot of talk in recent years about, do we even need to acknowledge giftedness? Why do we need to identify or label someone as gifted? I think that we have to be careful with that, because that can be a very slippery slope. And we need to acknowledge that giftedness exists, and to make sure that we are providing those services that are needed to help support those students in how they learn. So what that means is we need, as a field, we need to start looking at ourselves in the mirror, examining our own practices. How do we start to dispel the myths of giftedness as exclusive? And so talent development, I think, for me, is a huge piece of the answer to that question. Because through talent development, it gives us an opportunity to see the range of strengths that exist amongst our students. And one of the biggest shifts in the United States has been a move towards using local norms in identification, of not just saying, okay, based upon this national score that's been generalized to everybody, by using local norms in our identification practices, and by offering opportunities for talent development, we're opening the door, we're casting that wider net that's needed within giftedness. And as that continues to happen and grow, I think, just as I alluded to in the previous question, we'll start to see more of a convergence of those models within our school systems.
Thank you, Matt. And Michelle.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. We too have got a complicated history, as you mentioned. We've had 2 Senate inquiries over the years. The last one was more than 20 years ago. So the first one was in 1988, and the last one was in 2001. Despite those, giftedness is still a widely misunderstood term, and still, like you said, conjures up many myths and stereotypes that often need counteracting before anyone can truly begin to understand what the term means. I suppose it probably doesn't help that as a field we haven't as yet arrived, if ever, a shared understanding of what we mean by giftedness And people often say to me, they know it when they see it. How many times have we heard that? But then trying to get them to describe what it is another thing. It comes with knowledge and experiences, giftedness and gifted learners, I think. And in Australia, various educational jurisdictions continue to use the term gifted, and some have shifted to using it interchangeably with the term high potential. But most state and territory departments are using some form of that and basing it off Professor Gagne's differentiating model of giftedness and talent. So for those of you who perhaps aren't familiar with that model, it proposes that gifted is not a synonym for talent and vice versa. So giftedness is about potential, and then talent is seen as being about the actualization of that potential into fields of human competencies or endeavours. So because neurodiversity refers to differences in brains that lead to sensory, emotional, cognitive differences, then giftedness is indeed a form of neurodiversity. So perhaps the term neurodiversity is the umbrella term within which sits giftedness. What are your thoughts on this question, Christian?
I totally agree with you, Michelle and Matt. The prejudices against the concept of giftedness are often related to the one-sided focus on the traditional understanding of intelligence. In Germany and in our research community, focusing on gifted and talented children in Germany, the broader concept of giftedness, as I have presented, is very helpful, as we also learn from our schools in Germany, because everybody is focused. And what is also very important, there's a quote from Paula Kublius, reverse from identify then serve, then to serve then access. This is especially important, for example, for children from social disadvantaged backgrounds, but also for multiple exceptional children. So the concept of neurodiversity can be helpful here, especially with regard to the special needs of multiple exceptional learners.
Thank you, Christian. Let's shift a little bit because we've talked quite a bit about labeling. We've talked about what people are thinking about in terms of the differences between giftedness, neurodiversity, and the impact of talent development. Now let's talk about what we need to do as a profession so that we can prepare educators to recognize and support neurodiverse learners. And beyond initial licensure, can education systems prepare staff to meet the needs of neurodiverse students? Let's start with Michelle.
Thanks, Wendy. And this is such an important question. I know we're covering lots of important questions tonight, but this one's really close to my heart. Part of my role at Griffith University is to teach the next generations of teachers. So, of course, as much as I can, I get gifted education in there. But I think with any shifts in understanding, it can take a while to filter down to things like teacher preparation programs. There isn't yet, from my experiences and understandings, a good conceptualization of what giftedness here is in Australia, within or outside education settings. Some places are doing it really well, others still not quite sure what giftedness actually is, and you often hear the term, well, we don't have any of those here. By those, I think they mean gifted students. Teachers don't receive any compulsory preparation to teach gifted students over here. Most universities don't offer courses in gifted education for student teachers, which is a really huge problem and something that our national organisation is actually moving towards supporting that offering within initial teacher education, as we call it over here. I think both giftedness and neurodiversity need to be taught as compulsory topics in all teacher preparation programs so that all of the teachers begin their teaching careers with the ability to understand and support these students in their schools and classrooms. Importantly, in-service professional learning can help in upskilling teachers in gifted education. And of course, the World Council's global principles for professional learning can go a long way to supporting this. here in Australia and across the world. The principles can be used to create positive change for giftedness and, importantly, be the impetus that urges educational leaders and policymakers to invest in professional learning to benefit gifted education. We need to continue to advocate for the true inclusion of gifted and neurodiverse learners and empower all teachers with the skills and understanding to be able to expertly address the learning and social and emotional needs of gifted and neurodiverse students. What are your thoughts, Christian?
Your ideas are extremely important, especially we also have nearly the same situation in Germany. We have a strong focus on learning disabilities, but we do not have a focus on potentials, on talents, on strengths. And this is important because, especially in the area of neurodiversity, it's important to use the strengths to cope with the weaknesses. And in our country, first of all, it's important to provide the professional background on neurodiversity in undergraduate programs. Furthermore, it is significant to teach adapting teaching competencies with a focus on diagnostic, didactic, and communicative competencies. But furthermore, the potential-oriented pedagogical attitude of teachers in the context of neurodiversity proves to be central. And that's our idea in all our teacher training programs, as well as in further education, first to focus on the potentials of children. And in this context, the concept of neurodiversity is extremely helpful to have a broader view of diversity in total.
Thank you, Christian and Matt.
Yeah, sounds like we have a global problem in that we are not preparing our teachers, our pre-service teachers, to work with gifted students. I know in the United States, in a lot of our teacher preparation programs, the name will vary, but somewhere in there it will be a course about special populations, which really becomes an overview of special education needs, of which, you know, I distinctly remember coming up through my teacher preparation program. Giftedness was about 2 paragraphs in a chapter, and if you didn't read it, you missed it because we didn't discuss it in class, right? And that was untold numbers of years ago, but the situation hasn't changed. So Michelle, much like you know, when I was working with pre-service teachers, you know, because of my background in giftedness and twice exceptionality, that information got into my class, to my students, but it didn't go anyplace else, right? And so in the United States, it has become important that this training does come from within the education system itself, within once licensure has been achieved. But still, there's not enough focus within school districts to make that a part of practice. And so it's really become incumbent upon the educator themselves to seek out those resources for those trainings. And usually it's because they're sitting there in a classroom, and for the first time, they have that neurodiverse learner. And now they have to figure out, what do I do? Because we haven't, as a system, prepared them for the reality of the students that they're facing. You know, I used to work a lot with, we had a lot of pre-service teachers in our program who were paraprofessionals, you know, education support personnel within schools. And I always used to tell them when they were preparing to take their exams for certification, I'm like, okay, remember, when you're answering the question, you're thinking your answer needs to be addressed to the ideal world, not the real world. and because they were the ones who would struggle the most on the exams, because they're like thinking about, at school, I know how this works, so you would do this, but that's not the ideal world answer. because again, everything is set up to this mindset of the middle, the generalizability across all populations. And that's a piece that we're really missing. We're not getting deep enough within our teacher preparation programs into the uniqueness and diversity of the students that teachers will be working with in their classrooms.
Well, taking a look at the questions and answers that are coming through, it appears to be a global problem, Matt, just as you mentioned. And one of the things that that I'm reading here is that there are many people in our field who are very, very committed to gifted education and who, like you, no matter where they live in the world, have been working to infuse gifted education concepts within their teacher preparation. But we know that we can't rely just on teachers. And I think this is something that I hear and think about on a regular basis. And I'm guessing once again, it's a world problem. Without the support from school administrators and other policymakers, we really struggle to infuse gifted education in today's schools. So let's take a look at what they can do to help. So we'll start with Christian for this question. And Christian, how can school administrators and other policymakers support neurodiverse learners and gifted learners?
Yeah. Thank you very much, Wendy, for this extremely important question. In my opinion, it's one of the most important questions in total. In my opinion, school administrators and other decision makers can communicate key ideas and successful strategies for supporting neurodiverse learners. But they also can create the legal, financial, human resource structural framework necessary to do so. So that's a very important experience in our program. Our government spends 125 million euros on this funding initiative to support gifted and talented children. And this funding is extremely important to realize, to develop materials for neurodiverse learners, to create teacher training programs, but also to influence the school structure. And this is the first time where we can realize that this in Germany in a successful way. Before that, we often experience teachers who are very engaged in a personal way, but they didn't get the resources by the school. And we also observe that parents are often very engaged into this topic, but the school does not offer the necessary structures. So school administrators and decision makers, in my opinion, are the most important target group for this.
Thank you, Christian. Quick follow-up question for you. You mentioned the funding from the German government. Approximately how long has that been around? Is that new or something that's been around for quite some time?
Yes, this funding initiative started at 2018, and the first period ended this year. And during the funding initiative, we developed materials for schools, for gifted and talented children. And we worked together from 17 universities in all over Germany with 300 schools in Germany. And this year, the second period of this funding initiative begins from 2023 up to 2027. And the idea is to transform and implement those ideas in further 1,000 schools in all over Germany. And that's a really great chance to realize gifted education and talent development. And without the decisions of school administrators and decision makers, we weren't able to realize that. So that's my idea, that it's extremely important that also decision makers, policy makers are included in our ideas to realize gifted education and talent development. And so we have the chance to create new ideas in the whole school system. But what is also important to realize a new idea of giftedness and talent, which addresses every student, not only the small group of the so-called highly gifted children. So that also fits very good to the idea of neurodiversity, of inclusive education. For example, we also address children with special needs, with learning disabilities, with our concepts of potential development. And this is extremely important. And so therefore, this question is so important.
Well, I can't help but feel a little bit, a lot jealous,
Yes.
because we have yet to have a national mandate, a national movement toward gifted education in the United States. So I am more than just a little bit jealous. I'm going to turn right now to Matt. And Matt, tell us what school administrators and other policymakers can do in the U.S.
First of all, I need to second your comment on that, Wendy. Christian, kudos to all the work that you and everyone is doing there in Germany, because we are not seeing that in the United States. Certainly not at the policy level. Because it does, Wendy touched on this earlier, the way it works in the United, we don't have a federal we don't have a federal mandate, a federal initiative for gifted education. We do for special education, right? And so there is a discrepancy there. So for gifted education, it's left to each individual state. So you've got a patchwork of not even 50 because not all states are on board to even recognize and acknowledge from a legislative viewpoint about giftedness of definitions of regulations for identification that can filter down. In Texas, we don't have a mandate. We have a state plan that leaves it to each individual district how identified, how they are served. Now, the good thing is in Texas, we do have what I lovingly call the trifecta from the policy level. Our state legislature has mandated identification and services of gifted education. So identification, mandated services, and there is a little bit of money attached to it as well to help support that within districts. So really then all of this leads to, within the structure of the United States, the school administrator is the one who sets the culture of the district and of the school. And so for those districts that we see that this giftedness has become an imperative, then you're seeing a lot of work being done. And a lot of movement. And so what we have to do is, we have to continue advocating at the legislative level, at the policy level, but we also have to advocate within our schools and within our school district to make sure that giftedness becomes a factor that administrators are focused on, because that is where ultimately, at the end of the day, how the dollars are distributed, where the importance of trainings, internal district and school level professional learning opportunities come in. Those districts where those administrators are focused on the needs of our gifted populations, we're seeing that teachers are being trained. It's become a part of the culture of the district, and so it's important within the district. We've got to increase that. We need to start seeing that happen in a broader context across the United States, because right now, at the federal level, the attention is just simply not there.
Matt, I couldn't agree more about the lack of federal attention, but I do have a question, a follow-up for you. And this regards professional learning and the role of the administrator in terms of ensuring that their staff are well prepared. We heard from several people this morning, and I see it in the chat as well, that when teachers enter their school buildings for the first time, they aren't ready. They have had very little exposure in undergraduate settings to gifted and talented learners. And we know that the preparation requires many pieces of information, strong pedagogy, strong understanding, classroom management. But our teachers are going into school without that preparation. Is that part of the administrator's job to ensure that our teachers have an opportunity to get that education while they're in the classroom and as they continue in their work?
Yes, full stop. I mean,
Okay,
yes. Administrators do have that responsibility because those students are in those classrooms. That is just the pure reality of it. And so if we are not preparing our teachers, you know, what the term a lot of states have adopted within their teacher accountability systems is highly capable, right?
Okay.
Highly effective teachers. If administrators aren't providing that professional learning opportunity for their teachers to work with the students that are there, how can we say that we are providing all of our children with highly capable educators? And so, yes, is it fair to the administrator? No. That work should start at the pre-service level, but we're not there yet. And so in the stopgap, yes, the administrator should take responsibility for providing those opportunities for their teachers.
Okay, let's move around the world to Australia. And Michelle, tell us what you think about the role of administrators in supporting professional learning and policy for gifted and talented educators. Excuse me, not just the educators, but also speaking about preparation in neurodiversity.
Thanks, Wendy. And yeah, I must say that, and I'm sure all the Australian participants will be very jealous of what's happening in Germany as well. And I think what Matt was saying is very similar here. And I think a lot of it connects back to initial teacher education. So what's happening with pre-service teachers, and, you know, as I said before, that varies from state to state, from university to university, but overall, not much is happening. So I think that buy-in that we need from school administrators and policymakers comes back to a lack of knowledge and lack of understanding about what giftedness is, what it actually means, what it is. So I think when we have more of an understanding at that administrator and policymaker level, then there'll be more people, hopefully, who can advocate for the mandating of some kind of legislation to support gifted and neurodiverse students. And that's really important. So I think ensuring all teacher preparation programs have core courses and teach about supporting both gifted, neurodiverse, and twice exceptional students as well, and students with disability. We need to make sure that inclusion means all students are included. And we have policies in many education jurisdictions in Australia about inclusion. Often gifted students are sort of pushed to one side or left out of that altogether. So it means what we've been talking about, understanding what strengths-based approaches mean in practice, what it looks like, what instructional differentiation looks like, how it can be applied, you know, some really kind of strategies that teachers can actually use to personalise learning and support the students to develop their potential, whatever that might be. The problem with educational policy, I think, is it's not enforceable. It tends to change depending on what's seen as present issues in education. We're having a real shift around that. There's been a big education review in Australia, and things are shifting in some would think not very good direction. Others might say there's some positives coming out of it. But it tends to shift depending on what current governments want to focus on. But I think without specific mandated legislation around giftedness, twice exceptionality, neurodiversity, students are provided with what they need to learn through appropriate accommodations and adjustments. At least here in Australia, many of these students will continue to underachieve, leave school prematurely and not develop their potential, which of course means a huge loss to society.
Well, I have to say that I've been monitoring what our questions and answers are. And not only do we have this ray of hope coming from Germany, but there are several other countries that are also making gifted education a priority. We know that that is true of Egypt, probably about 10 years ago, made it a priority. Whether it is fully implemented, we do not know at this point, but we know that that was a priority. Here's another one. This is a wonderful comment that comes to us from the chat. It says, India has finally recognized the significant need to address gifted students, and we have a small section devoted to gifted in our national education policy. It's a ray of hope for our country. So that's really exciting. I always love to hear about good things that are happening because we know sooner or later these things spread. It's just that I'm a little impatient. I don't know about you folks, but I want it to happen tomorrow. In fact, last year would have been good too. You know, one of the things that we haven't talked today about is the role of parents and what their role is not only in their children's education, but as advocates, as people who are, excuse the expression, pushing the buttons on school administrators, really making certain that those needs are being addressed. Let's talk about that for a moment. We'll start with Matt here. Matt, how can we help parents and others who need to know about gifted learners and about their students in particular? What can we do to educate parents? And also in your country, are parents allowed and empowered to advocate for their children?
So this is a great question and one that I often touch on when I'm talking to teachers and other educators about meeting the professional learning needs of all stakeholders. And in one slide that I often use when I'm talking about this, in big bold letters in that list, at the end is parents too with an exclamation point. You know, we've got to help our parents learn better. Forgive me, Wendy, you know, I sometimes have to tell a story. But I remember being on a flight going up to Minnesota to see you and for the Hormel Symposium. And I was preparing my I was working on my PowerPoint on the plane, and the lovely woman sitting next to me was reading a book, and I you know, out of my peripheral, I can kind of see her eyes darting over more and more to my screen. And finally she says, I apologize. What is it you are working on? And I was preparing a session on gifted and ADHD. And so I'm talking to her about this idea of twice exceptionality. And she looked at me and she said, "Oh my God, you just described my son. She goes, but I didn't know there was actually a term for it. And no one has known in his school how to help him. And I don't know how to properly advocate for him." Right? we've got to include our parents. We've got to provide the opportunity for our parents to learn. So, you know, in theory, yes, our parents in the United States are encouraged and empowered to advocate for their children. But if we don't provide them with the information they need, it makes it very difficult for them to be able to be that adequate advocate for their students when they're sitting in those special education meetings, those IEP meetings, the annual review meetings. And so it's really important. We have to broaden who we are targeting professional learning towards, and make sure that we're including parents so that they can become those advocates, armed with the information they need. Because a lot of times they're walking into environments where the educators in the room also don't have all the information they need and the training they need to service their child. And so at the end of the day, it's really important that training is provided to those parents, because the students and their needs are at stake. And that should be our number one priority. And
Michelle.
Yeah, I think that's the same here too. I mean, we've got some really, really knowledgeable and experienced educators, and neurodiverse and gifted students are really fortunate to have these people as their teachers. Parents need to advocate. It seems to be an ongoing requirement. Parents, I mean, that's how I got into gifted education, through my own advocacy for my son. It's helping parents feel empowered to advocate for their child. You know, when they're advocating, they can join other parent associations, self-educate, talk to other parents who have similar children. And really importantly, when the child's ready, they can self-advocate for their needs as well. And I think that's really important, to teach a child to understand themselves. And it's okay to speak up, you know, support them through problem solving and those kind of things when they come across situations. Often this empowers the child to be able to speak up when they need to, and advocate for others as well. And I think self-advocacy skills will really help a child through their lives to be confident in speaking up for what they need in education and then in the workforce.
Well, we have very little time left, but I do want to give Christian an opportunity to answer this question. And then we're going to go to very quick closing comments. So, Christian, would you like to speak about the role of parents in Germany?
The parents' associations are the most important groups in Germany in the area of gifted education, because parents start to focus on the topic of giftedness, where teachers ignore this topic. So parents in particular can contribute the important experiences, especially in a potential-oriented interaction with neurodiverse learners as well. So that's extremely important for our teachers as well, because parents do have a deep insight into their children. And in Germany, the parents are the first, the most important stakeholders for this topic. Without the parents, the idea of gifted education will not be as important as it is today. But what is also important is the topic of science communication. This has a key role to play in adequately communicating current concepts from scientific research and school practice. This is also very important for parents as well, to know about this and to bring the idea of giftedness and talent development in the whole society.
Well, we have had a very active conversation today. Lots of questions in the chat. I've tried to weave them through because we are really going to be short on time. But in a quick go around, starting with, let's see, we'll start with Matt. Matt, tell us one thing that we could do tomorrow. If you had a magic wand, what is that one thing you'd implement tomorrow?
Wow. Okay. there's so many things. No,
You get one.
I think and the one thing I would implement tomorrow is that professional learning piece. Having administrators go out and really look at their professional learning structures and ensuring that their educators within their schools and districts have those opportunities to learn more, because those students are sitting in their classrooms.
Thank you. And Michelle, your magic wand, one thing you could implement tomorrow.
Okay, I was going to say what Matt said, but I'll add to that. I think appropriately identifying, recognising, addressing needs of gifted students, we can create really inclusive, enriched educational settings that are genuinely inclusive. And inclusive education must mean that everyone is included, not everyone except gifted and neurodiverse students.
Okay, I like your magic wand as well. And Christian, we're passing the magic wand to you. One thing tomorrow morning.
I also focus on teacher training and further education, and to make clear that in the face of global challenges, gifted education and talent development can make an important contribution to shape the future. That is also very important for this, and so we need teacher training and further education, and we talk about this in our EDGE panel as well.
Thank you. We could go on for 5 hours. I wish we had that time. I'd like to thank Michelle, Matt, and Christian for their time today. Our panelist from the World Council, our person who introduced us, Margaret, as well as Tyler and the whole crew at World Council. This has been a great conversation, and we certainly wish that we had more time. We appreciate each and every one of you, the work that you do on behalf of gifted and talented and neurodiverse learners throughout the world. Thank you so very much. It's been a wonderful morning, noon, or night, depending on where you are, and have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Can I just echo those comments of Wendy's? It's been a superb session, I think, that could indeed go on for longer. We've taken a note of the comments that have been coming through, and you can see there from the chat just now, very much appreciated by those who have attended, and I'm quite sure this will be listened to as well as we go on. So thank you so much, everybody who spoke and shared their thoughts, and thank you to all of you for coming. Enjoy the rest of the conference. Make sure you go and chat to people, even although we are doing this virtually.